In this video, I just want to show you some alternative marking gauges, the way you make them and the way you can sort of come up with your own designs for marking gauges. This all came about because I have one of these marking gauges, which is a very nice Veritas product. And look, it worked fine for quite some time, but after sort of a couple of years of use, what happened was that once you tighten up the screw, this part of the marking gauge, it sort of doesn't hold the stem in place, and so clearly you can't have a marking gauge where you want accuracy, obviously, from a marking gauge. You can't have a marking gauge where the stem is going to slip away from the position that you want it to be in and give you inconsistent results. So I sort of looked around the internet and looked at sort of various videos on what people have done to come up with their own marking gauge designs and ideas, and my main goal in coming up with my own idea was to come up with a design that required very little hardware purchase, because marking gauges in themselves are not particularly expensive, so the last thing you want to do is go and make your own marking gauge, which is going to end up costing you more than a marking gauge that you could actually buy off the shelf. So what I want to show you are two designs which don't particularly look all that good, but they're very effective in what they do, and they're extremely sort of easy to make and cheap to make. This is the first one. Now this is an unusual looking marking gauge, but as you can see, it looks probably more like a hammer. But this particular design works quite well, and as I bring it closer to the camera, you can see that what we've got here is a blade which is held in place by a screw, and the nail here simply ensures that the blade doesn't move around as you're scoring the line. In this case, the whole thing is basically wooden construction. It doesn't have any metal strips, which a lot of the marking gauges that you see on the shop bought, the shop made ones that you see, particularly in the American videos, have that sort of metal strip onto which you then use a nut to screw and secure the stem onto the body. In this particular design, all I've got are these two screws, which kind of allow the marking gauge fence to be set to wherever you want it to be, and then when you're finished setting the distance from the fence to the end of the blade, you simply tighten these two up and off you go. So this is a very simple design, and what I'm going to do is open this up to show you how I actually put this together. First thing to do is to get rid of these two nuts, and once we do that, you will see that all I've got is these two bolts, which are at the bottom there. So the top piece just comes off like so. So really, it's got these three parts. It's got this, which in my case is the bottom part. Then it's got the actual stem, which has got the blade on the very edge of it. And then it's got this bit, which is the top bit, if you like, which then goes on top, and the stem goes in between. So all I've done, as you can really see here, is there's two pieces here which have got a groove cut into them. You can use a router table. You can do this with hand saw and chisel. It's really up to you. You then need a stem, which you're going to use a hand plane and other tools to get down to the exact size. And then what you want to do is ensure that it slides nice and neatly, but without any sort of wriggling in that sort of groove. Then you can get this bit back up. I've inset these two bolts just to make sure that there's nothing sticking out at the bottom. There you go, that's in place, and that's all there is to it. You just screw the blade onto the end, and the nail there, as I said before, keeps the blade from flicking up as you're actually scoring a line. So this is a very simple design. I think if anyone with the right sort of setup with a router, perhaps with a router table, could easily get this job done in easily under an hour. And I guess the test of any jig or in this case marking gauge is how well it actually works. So let's have a quick look at how this would work on a piece of material. I've got here a bit of Vic Ash, and as you can see, it does a pretty good job of scoring lines across the grain. I'm not sure if you're going to be able to see that in the video here, but you can probably sort of see the line just there that it's scored, and it does a pretty decent job of scoring lines with the grain as well. And you're certainly not going to be able to see this one because the line is extremely fine. Now, the other design aspect of this particular marking gauge is the fact that the blade is at the very edge of the stem. Now, the reason why I like that particularly is when you're trying to set your distance from the edge of the blade to the fence here, you don't want to have to kind of look underneath. You don't have to look underneath here if you've got a sort of nail system instead of the blade system, and it's very difficult to then kind of look at where the nail is and then set the fence. This, on the other hand, allows you to look at the ruler from the top as you're setting up the measurements. So it's a lot easier, and it allows you, I think, to be more accurate in setting up your distance between the blade and the fence. The other thing you can do is ensure that if you've got a blade like this, that the bevel on the bevel on the blade and the edge of the blade is such that as you score the line, it actually pulls the wood in towards the fence rather than kind of slip away. And that also ensures that the line that you're going to scribe is going to be nice and tight and clear and straight. So that's the advantage of using these. Now, in terms of hardware purchase, I mean, I already had these knobs, but basically all you need is a bunch of bolts, depending on the thickness of your wood. And you know, even a sort of wing nut here will do the same job that these two nuts are doing in this particular design. And of course, you can make this as big or as small as you want. The blade at the front, you can get these in a sort of multi-pack, and in this case, you know, there's about 5 or 7 blades in there, and they're about $2. So overall cost of production for something like this is most likely under about $5. But as I said, it does the job. The wood doesn't slip. The stem does not slip in the system because the wood on either side here, and on this side is actually sandwiching that stem into place. So of course, when you're trying to get that fit just right, what you want to ensure is the stem is just a little thicker on this dimension. So that what happens is these two pieces of wood, the top and the bottom bit, actually kind of sandwich the stem in place as you screw these thumb screws in. And that's really what kind of makes this a very reliable marking gauge in terms of the stem not slipping out of its place. The other one I'm going to show you quickly is what looks much more like a traditional style marking gauge. But again, the system that I've used here is, instead of having a metal strip here and having a screw at the top in the middle, what I've got is the screws on either end, and these screws go all the way down towards the end, as you can see. Again, it's not the prettiest looking marking gauge, but it does a pretty good job. So in this case, you've got the two pieces either side, and again, if we loosen up these two nuts, that allows us to move the stem. The design at the end is identical to the previous one, and again, that's because I like to have the blade at the edge of the stem, at the very end of the stem, rather than a nail or a blade that's sticking out from underneath there. So this design is also much the same. I'm not going to undo this one because you can see that this screw just goes all the way through, and this also allows you to do a fairly decent job of scoring lines in wood, which is exactly what you want. So I'm not sure if you can be able to see the line that is actually scored. You probably can't see it on the video there, but I think you can probably see it just about now. So there's that line that is just scored. Again, it's pretty straight, pretty accurate. The cost of something like this is, again, assuming that you've already got the scraps of wood sitting there in your garage somewhere, probably no more than about $5. These things are pretty cheap, and once they wear out, you can simply just chuck them out and put in a new blade, and off you go. So the idea behind these is that I want the stem to not move from the position in which it was originally set. That's the whole point of a marking gauge, and clearly that's the thing that I've gone for in these designs. They're not the prettiest looking, but guess what? They do the job. They're extremely cheap, and you know, if you've got woodworking friends, you can kind of do up a much nicer one, perhaps even oil it, stain it, and give it to one of them as a present as well. So it's a pretty good set of marking gauges as far as my own woodworking is concerned. So hopefully this gives you some ideas for what you could make yourself in your shop. And thanks for watching.